good, everybody? I'm Jerry, about to check out how WWE fumbled the first brand split 2002. This video is about a wrestling historian. I feel like the only way they fumbled the brand split, or either one of the few ways they fumbled the brand split, was because they put Stone Cold on Raw. And everybody that was on Stone Cold's level was on SmackDown, or either babyfaces. Like, for instance, they had The Rock on SmackDown. Both Stone Cold and The Rock were babyfaces at the time. They had Kurt Angle on SmackDown. They had Chris Jericho on SmackDown at the time before Austin walked out. Triple H wasn't really fully drafted, but he was a babyface, and that was Stone Cold. That was one of Stone Cold's biggest rivals, was Triple H. Undertaker was he Undisputed Champion? No, he was not the Undisputed Champion at the time. But the Undertaker was drafted to Raw. They had a few good matches, nothing that stuck out. So I felt like that was one of the reasons that led to Austin leaving in June of 2002. But otherwise, I don't know what else or how WWE could have fumbled the brand split. We're about to check it out now. Let's go.
The ratings are going to go down, but it was kind of like, this is necessary for survival.
On March 18th, 2002, Linda McMahon announced that the company would split its roster between two shows, Raw and SmackDown. On paper, it was a bold, promising plan to refresh the product. In practice, however, the 2002 brand split got off to a famously rough start before WWE finally found its footing and saved the concept. So let's go back in time to like 2002 and see how WWE managed to
and I didn't see this episode
and how
of Raw.
They eventually saved it.
Numerous
Tonight,
times.
we will witness the first ever World Wrestling Federation draft.
Now, the actual first draft took place on March 25th, 2002, with Ric Flair and Vince McMahon dividing the roster.
There you see the podium that will be utilized tonight for our
The
draft.
Rock was the first person drafted to SmackDown. Undertaker was the first person drafted to Raw.
Some of the draft decisions were made purely for shock value. For example, splitting up the APA or splitting up the Dudley Boys.
Guess what, Rick? My next choice on SmackDown, I choose
Diva and Dudley.
This was done to highlight just how unpredictable the draft could be, and it did work. I mean, this was shocking at the time. But did this actually pay off for Bubba and Devon in the long term?
Bubba wasn't doing too much. Devon became Reverend Devon.
Underwhelming singles push on Raw, where he'd sometimes dance during matches, and the same went for Devon on SmackDown with his Reverend Devon gimmick, which was also pretty underwhelming. And this isn't just my
opinion. But they ended up getting
the
back together at
talent
Survivor
involved
Series
and the creative team agreed
that same
that
year.
it was a bad choice, with Bubba saying the following in a later interview.
Nobody wanted to see Bubba wrestle by himself. Nobody wanted to see Devon wrestle by himself.
Bruce Pritchard, a member of the creative team at the time, has also expressed regret over splitting up the Dudleys, with him explaining that it wasn't really thought through.
Obviously, it didn't work, and I was wrong.
What's funny is that because Billy and Chuck were drafted to SmackDown by Vince, the tag team titles became exclusive to the SmackDown. But because the WWE split up the majority of their tag teams during the draft, there weren't many established teams left for SmackDown. So honestly, keeping the Dudleys or even the APA together would have been a much better decision. There were some cool tag teams formed because
the tag division would have been a lot better.
Pretty cool, but they were practically two single stars just thrown together due to the lack of tag teams. The only established tag team they kept together was the Hardy Boys. For some strange reason though, Matt and Jeff were both drafted together onto the Red brand. But like, why? Why wouldn't you bring them over to SmackDown to feud with the tag champions, Billy and Chuck? I mean, if you really think about it, why would you put any of the tag teams on Raw?
But Matt ended up turning on Jeff
championships.
and went
I
to
know it isn't
SmackDown later
all
on.
about the titles, but this creative decision made the Raw tag teams feel somewhat redundant. It's clear in hindsight that WWE management just winged it at the start, and this was especially clear with how the rest of the roster and the championships were split up amongst both shows. For example, to make up for the lack of tag team championships on Raw, somebody thought it would be a good idea to give the Red brand all 3 mid-card titles. So 3 mid-card championships, but no tag team division. What was even stranger though, was how the WWE handled its top prize. This is honestly a very debatable topic, so just hear me out for a second. Initially, the plan was for the undisputed WWE Championship to float between Raw and SmackDown. While this sounded fine on paper, it just didn't work out very well. For example,
after
when
Brock
Triple H
Lesnar
was
won
WWE Champion in April 2002, he feuded with Hulk Hogan. But because Hulk was exclusive to SmackDown, Triple H rarely showed up on Mondays. More importantly though, the shared World Championship concept undermined the whole separate brands concept. I mean, the entire purpose of the brand split was to create competition and emulate the Monday Night Wars. But how are Raw and SmackDown supposed to feel like separate shows when they're sharing the top championship? And don't get me wrong, there are definitely ways to make one single world title work across two separate shows. It just wasn't working well in early 2002. And honestly, it held SmackDown and Raw back from truly reaching their potential as two separate shows. Once SmackDown got its own top championship, it truly let the brand flourish by giving stars like Eddie Guerrero, JBL, and many others a chance. If WWE stuck with the original plan of only one top championship, who knows if those stars
we wouldn't have
ever
seen
gotten a
Eddie
chance
Guerrero
to
or either
headline
John
a
Cena as world
WrestleMania.
champion.
Now, I do
Or
want to be
JBL.
fair though, as I'm putting a lot of the blame on WWE right now, but there were also a ton of other things out of the WWE's control that contributed to the fumbling of this first brand split, especially over on Raw. For example, a lot of the top stars drafted to Raw ended up being out of action for a variety of reasons. Kane was originally set to be a big name on Raw, but was written off TV to heal up an injury. This was done by the NWO, who'd attack Kane backstage. Speaking of the NWO, the group was also meant to be another main attraction for the Raw brand, but that started falling apart when Scott Hall unfortunately got released. But things only got worse from there when Kevin Nash got injured in July 2002, which at that point pretty much just killed the faction. The worst of all though was the departure of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Heading into June 2002, Austin was not very happy with WWE's creative, and he was especially unhappy with how the brand split was going. So Austin was just like, screw this shit, I'm out.
Bottom line is everything sucks. I'm not happy with the direction Stone Cold Steve Austin's going. I ain't happy with the direction the whole company's going. I think the writing has been pretty substandard. I'll go one better than that. It's been piss poor.
At this point, Raw pretty much lost all of its top names in the span of 2 to 3 months. And these losses mixed with the awful planning of the rosters meant that WWE needed to get their shit together and fast, leading to late July 2002 when Vince came out and made a bunch of announcements. One of them being that a free agent period had begun, meaning that any superstar could sign with another brand.
All the superstars on Raw, if you're that concerned, if you think the grass is greener on the other side, over here on SmackDown, you are free to negotiate with the GM of SmackDown.
Now WWE could trade superstars between the two shows and start to fix the roster mistakes made back
I think
in
Undertaker
April.
ended up
Vince
going to
also replaced
SmackDown
himself
during
and
that
Ric
time.
Flair with new general managers, Eric Bischoff on Raw and Stephanie McMahon on the Blue brand.
As time goes on, this brand separation is going to be really, really good for us. We have had some stutter starts with it to a certain extent, but now with Steph and Bischoff juxtaposed, it looks like it's going to work.
Bischoff and Stephanie were immediately pitted against each other in competition for ratings. But more importantly, that free agent period also meant that they'd be competing over talent. Both GMs started showing up on the opposite show, trying to poach wrestlers. But here's the thing, this talent war storyline, it wasn't only entertaining, but it also served a crucial purpose. It allowed WWE to rebalance the rosters under the guise of competition.
Eddie Guerrero.
For example, one of
came
Raw's
SmackDown.
biggest needs was a top-tier star to fill Austin's void. Eric Bischoff aggressively courted Triple H to sign with Raw, thus stealing him from SmackDown. Triple H would officially join Raw by the end of July 2002, thus correcting the lack of star power. Stephanie McMahon retaliated in a big way. Stephanie showed up in a limo and revealed that Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman were leaving with her. Surely enough, Brock Lesnar debuted as a SmackDown roster member shortly after. Another good example of how this free agent period helped is Matt Hardy. Back in April, Matt was drafted to Raw with Jeff, but as we discussed earlier, this was a really weird decision since there were no tag titles on Raw. However, when the free agent period opened up, the writers used it to fix their mistake, moving Matt over to SmackDown while keeping Jeff on Raw. And the results were much better, with Matt introducing his V1 gimmick and becoming one of SmackDown's top heels. From here, the chess moves continued weekly through August. Talents were traded or unexpectedly showed up on new shows. For example, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Big Show were moved over to SmackDown. In exchange, Raw acquired the likes of the Un-Americans. So Christian, Lance Storm, and Test, as well as Chris Jericho, and eventually Stacy Keibler. Now on screen, these decisions were presented as a conflict between Stephanie McMahon and Eric Bischoff, but these new general managers were more or less just on-screen characters. What truly
Heyman was the
were
writer
changes
behind
made behind the
SmackDown
scenes.
during that
Originally, both Raw and SmackDown shared these same writing teams during the first 3 months of the brand split, but this changed when Stephanie and Eric were brought in, with Paul Heyman becoming the lead writer on SmackDown, while Brian Gertz would write Raw. And there's actually a very interesting backstory from both Brian and Paul on how they would trade talent.
SmackDown had Jericho and the Un-Americans. My eye was on Guerrero. I proposed a trade. The behind-the-scenes laughter at my proposal could be heard across the street. I knew this was the deal of the millennium for SmackDown.
We did not have anyone who could host a talk show segment and be that kind of character.
Chris Jericho.
You know what? Throw in Chris Jericho, and then we'll talk. Obviously, it's not a question of a handshake deal, and hey, Vince, we made a trade. You got to sell it to him. And Vince, saw a lot of value in the Un-Americans and saw a lot of value in Jericho being on Raw as well. And I think both shows benefited from it.
At this point, Raw and SmackDown were genuinely starting to feel like two separate shows. And heading into the final quarter of 2002, both brands started to have their own identities.
Yeah.
SmackDown became the wrestling show, known for its in-ring quality, cruiserweights like Rey Mysterio, and exciting new talent like John Cena. Well, Raw leaned into being the sports entertainment show, with bigger personalities like Chris Jericho or Shawn Michaels. Alongside that roster shakeup, WWE also cleaned up the title scene. In July and August 2002, two long-standing belts were quietly retired. First, on the July 22nd edition of Raw, Eric Bischoff announced that the IC and European Championships would be unified that very night. And a month later, they did the same thing with the Hardcore Championship. Both of these unification matches happened with no real pay-per-view build or big storyline. They were literally announced the day of, which shows that WWE was rushing to clean up the mid-card division. And it worked. Now the focus was entirely on the IC Championship, and Raw's mid-card was much, much stronger. Heading into August 2002, the WWE Undisputed Championship was still being shared amongst both shows.
Yeah.
But things were about to change.
Until Brock
At
won
SummerSlam
it.
2002,
Brock
Lesnar won the title from The Rock. And the next week, Stephanie McMahon announced that Brock Lesnar was only to appear on SmackDown, meaning that the Undisputed WWE Championship was now a SmackDown-only title.
You know the deal. The champion wrestles on both shows.
No, Eric. It's the champion's prerogative which show he wrestles on, and I happen to pay Brock
That what
Lesnar
caused
a
them
whole lot of
to
money
bring back
to
the
be
big
exclusive
gold
to
belt
SmackDown.
This
and
move
give
left
it to
Raw
Triple
without
H.
a real world champion, so this
I
prompted
think
Eric
around
Bischoff
Survivor
to
Series.
create a new one. He brought back the retired WCW big gold belt,
Yeah.
one of the best world championship designs, just saying, and introduced
My
it
favorite,
as
one
a
of my
new
favorites.
World Heavyweight
Along with that
Championship,
old
awarding it to
Undisputed
Triple H
Championship,
on
too.
September 2nd, 2002.
Ladies and gentlemen, your new world champion, Triple H!
The last step was addressing the tag team situation. Rather than keep one set of tag titles floating, WWE decided to create two. So the World Tag Team Championships were moved over to Raw. Meanwhile, Stephanie McMahon introduced new tag team titles for SmackDown. With these changes, by the end of 2002, the brand splits championship structure made much more sense, and things would become even more balanced by mid-2003, when SmackDown introduced the United States Championship as an Intercontinental Championship.
Then they had the Cruiserweight
At this point, each brand now
Championship too
had
on
4
SmackDown.
titles. A world title, a tag title, a secondary singles title, and one division that was exclusive to each brand, with SmackDown exclusively having the Cruiserweights and Raw exclusively having
Women's
Divas.
division.
And honestly, these fixes all coming together, shaking
made
the
sense
roster,
for
the
that
general
time.
managers, and the revision of the title scene fixed a lot of the messiness that came with that initial draft. So you gotta give WWE credit for finding a way to fix all of
They
this in the
definitely
span of
bounced
like a
back.
couple of months. Because at the time, there were rumors of them abandoning the brand split entirely. And I'm very thankful that they didn't, because this brings me to the final point I want to talk about today, and that's just how important this brand split was for WWE. Both Raw and SmackDown developed their own identities that would carry the company through the next several years. By early 2003, it was undeniable that the brand split succeeded in rejuvenating WWE. It created an environment where talent who might have been overshadowed before could finally break through.
When you have one roster, you can't really push other people except your main guys.
JBL is like a prime example, as he was somebody that became a big star out of necessity because SmackDown needed another top guy. If there was no brand split, this probably would have never happened. Triple H would have just continued dominating as the main champion. I could honestly go on for days about this next part, but I do think I'm going to wrap up the video here. I think you guys get the point. The brand split was a major W for WWE, a huge win, but more importantly, I hope that this video documented just how messy that first brand split was. WWE did not have a plan, but in the end, they figured it out.
It
So
worked
you
out
gotta
for
give them their props for that. But yeah, you're watching Wrestling Historian. I use no AI in my content, so if you enjoyed this, please subscribe. I'm so thankful
I like
for
the
fact
video.
that we hit 1K so fast, guys. Like that Triple H video ended up doing so well. Like you guys have no idea how unexpected that was for me, and I'm very happy that I have you guys here subscribed to me and that you guys want this content because I love this shit. So yeah, I'll talk to you guys soon. I've got tons of content coming, and make sure to follow us over on Instagram. I have my personal Instagram on screen, and I have the Wrestling Historian Instagram where I post like clips over there daily, like nostalgic Raw and SmackDown clips. Anyways, I'm gonna shut up now. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Alright, y'all. Extremely great video, man. Thank you, Wrestling Historian, for putting that together. I definitely was a fan of the brand split. I was young when it actually happened, but I went back and watched it years later. I think I started watching wrestling in 2004. So by that time, they had already had, I think, a second draft. But I definitely enjoyed the Ruthless Aggression era. I grew up during that era, and it was definitely one of my favorite eras of all time. Alright, y'all. Other than that, man, let me know down below in the comments of what y'all want me to react to next. Like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, I'm out. Peace.